Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hunt Science Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance, a professionally certified wildlife biologist and natural resource professional, college professor, and owner of Land Source Consulting. The Hunt Science Podcast is dedicated to bring you the latest information on popular habitat management topics, wildlife science, hunting strategies, and the general conservation and land management practices to help preserve our natural resources. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you with us and hope that you enjoy today's episode. With that said, let's get started. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our primary sponsor, Land Source Consulting. Land Source Consulting is an Ohio-based wildlife and land management consulting company that I own and operate not only here in Ohio, but through the Midwest and beyond. At Land Source, we work with private landowners just like you to build and develop those property-specific management programs to help bring the goals that you have on your property to life. If you're interested in getting more information on who we are and how we can help you, please visit us over at landsourceconsulting.com. There you can check out the different service packages and capabilities that we can provide. We would love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to reach out to us and schedule that free consultation either through our website, or you can reach out to us and connect with us on our other social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. That's landsourceconsulting.com, building relationships for a more sustainable future. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Eric Lance. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us once again back to the show. And of course, I want to give a big welcome to those who are checking us out for the first time. All right, a couple of general housekeeping things like usual. Whatever you are doing right now, please stop and head over to our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out with the algorithm and let people know that people are out there listening to our show and like what we're doing. Also, while you're there, make sure you like the videos that you're watching and, of course, hit that bell notification icon so that you can continue to be updated on all of the new content that we put out here at the show. Also, don't forget, you can find us on other social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and even Twitter. Head on over to those pages, give them a follow, give them a like on the things that we're posting over there. All of the above, everyone here knows how the social media games works. But anyway, head on over there, check us out, like, follow, subscribe, share, all of the above. Really helps us out, and we really appreciate it. Now, on today's episode, we have with us Jeremy Flinn of the HUNTR Podcast. Jeremy is a wildlife biologist and Pennsylvania native who also serves as a real estate agent and land specialist with Whitetail Properties. Jeremy has been in the wildlife game for quite some time and is absolutely no stranger to the social media or podcasting world or even the whitetail world in general. Jason has served as a private consultant for a number of years while also owning and operating a successful media company as well. Having done his graduate work at the infamous Mississippi State University and all of the great minds coming out of the MSU Deer Lab, I was super excited to get a chance to sit down with him and talk everything deer, and even talking a little bit about his time at the infamous Mississippi State University. So with that, I hope everybody enjoys today's episode, and as always, let's not keep you waiting any longer and get this episode going with Jeremy Flinn. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Eric Lance, and today, special guest, Jeremy Flinn. Jeremy, how you doing, man?
What's up, brother?
Good, man. Thanks for coming on the show. So first time I'm getting to meet you, and when you told me you actually listened to some of my episodes, I was like, get the hell out of here. Like,
well, dude, the name caught me, right? I mean, because, you know, a lot of people do know, but not everybody does know that, like, my background is as a wildlife biologist, too, and you know, so I remember seeing the podcast name come across, and, you know, it was probably with Bronson or someone as well. And I was like, damn, dude. I was like, okay. I was like, I like where this is going. Because we talked kind of pre-podcast, you know, you see how many podcasts are out there right now. And so a lot of time it's, how are you going to be different, you know, than what else is out there? And that's not a knock on other podcasts out there. It's just, you know, some of the Q&A, like, hey, you know, well, what's your favorite way to hunt this? Or, you know, what's your favorite food plot to plant? Like, those just get, I mean, you hear it so often, and you can tell it with the guests too, man, because they're just like, they're just spitting out the same thing over and over. So, yeah, man, I mean, kudos to you on taking a new turn on it.
Yeah, I guess, you know, like I said, you know, we were talking off air. For me, just, I'm a generalist when it comes to, you know, as a wildlife guy. You know, like I told you, you know, I really kind of class myself as an ecologist, you know, because I focus on so many other species. You know, my company doesn't only, like I said, do whitetail. You know, I'm not a guy that's only going to manage for whitetail deer. You know, we're going to do, you know, general impact, you know, avian mortality surveys for, you know, solar farms or wind farms. Like, you know, I'm going to do that as well as permit the entire site through the EPA and the Army Corps and, other agencies and things like that. So, my company does a lot of different things. So for me, we don't answer the one call, only for whitetails, like a lot of consultants do. And there's nothing wrong with that. For me, I have a love for whitetails, but, get a little bit burnt out on it after so many years of focusing on it.
Absolutely.
And kind of, getting into the other species management that maybe you had aspirations of dipping your toe into, and then years later you finally did it and you're like, why didn't I do this from the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing too on the whitetail side is everybody's an expert, right? Like even if you go out and consult for somebody and they're paying you to come out there and tell, like I've had numerous times standing there and they're like, well, that's not how that works. And it's like, yeah, that's science. It's biology. That's how it is.
Yeah.
But they just, everybody feels like they're an expert because they're so passionate in that whitetail vertical.
Yeah. And we don't do ourselves any good, as no. Most I don't say most biologists, but there's a lot of biologists out there that, we don't do ourselves any favors, and the way things are talked about sometimes. I think a lot of managers need to be honest of really what's going to work. And, I think people make it too complicated. When I talk with people, everything is, I read this in the magazine, I read this, and I'm going to put this clover plot in. It's like, dude, you got 3 species of clover all over out here, man. Like, I mean, you're putting a McDonald's next to a Wendy's, not that, type of thing. I'm like, you need diversity. Like you're doing this, you're anthropomorphizing, the management side. You're looking at this through your lens, not the lens of a whitetail or not the lens of a turkey or a quail or anything like that. And like you said, it's science. And in 10 years, maybe we find out, Craig will come out with some study and you're like, oh man, we were way wrong,
That's
with that.
Exactly it.
Yeah, but it's an art form, I tell people. When it comes to management, me and you can look at a property and have, 2 very different, management styles probably.
For sure.
Just like 2 canvases are painted differently from 2 different artists. You might know the science of blending colors together, but you really don't know, what might work in one property is not going to work, on other properties.
Well, and then that's the biggest thing. And again, there's so much content today out there on those different pieces. And what people fail to realize is, like, if I'm watching it from Pennsylvania and this person's in Iowa, what the soils they're dealing with are nothing like the soils I'm dealing with. Right. Yeah. And so, they're trying to take apples to apples right there. And it's just not going to work. Right. And then what happens is they fail and they blame themselves. They're just like, oh man, I suck at this. I'm never going to be able to grow X in this soil. And it's like, well, no, not in the condition the soil is right now, at least.
Yeah. And we'll get into this a little bit later too, but then you start adding the social media piece, and then people, the way I'm just going to say the hunting culture is going with social media is that people, I think, not so much as people would think, but I think there's a lot of hesitancy on asking the questions online, because you're just like, dude, like I want to ask this question in that example that you gave. And now you're going to get bombarded with just the keyboard warriors, man. I had a post the other day, I posted a photo of, I was on a project completely unrelated. It was a utility project, and the landowner had come out and we saw a bunch of turkeys, man. I saw some huge, I saw a huge tom out there. I'm like, oh my God, and he's like, he comes over, he's like, yeah, we're hunting that thing this week. I'm like, all right, good luck. He's like, hey, so they tell me you're a biologist. He's like, you do work with wildlife at all? And I was like, yeah, so he wanted to show me his turkey area, that he did a real large select cut harvest, real, just, it was really nice. Ragweed, the vegetation was growing up to about 2 foot high. And we actually saw hens, walking around in there, just the vegetation was just underneath their head. Yeah. I'm like, this is perfect. I'm like, I said, great job. This is really, really, I'm happy to see this. And we talked for a little while about things. So I just took a photo and just posted about it. And I get, messages about, well, it's the time of year, so you got to take canopy closure. And I'm like, you think I don't know about canopy closure? Like, okay, sorry, I don't have a drone out. I didn't think I needed to get an angle from everything. Like, I just wanted to show, like, hey, man, like someone's actually managing for turkeys, and on their own, they built some pretty good habitat without the help of anybody. Like, that's something, like, that was a high five, like, good job, and it's just that kind of shit to where, you're in the media game, you have your media company and things like that, but, putting out podcasts and doing social media content stuff, it's just like, that's the part that I really wish I could just get rid of
It's
social media.
tough, man. I mean, we've tried to follow like our comments, and we've got some good people, man, that come back
absolutely.
all the time, and it's good to see them and comment. But man, some of these keyboard warriors are just off the charts, and some of them I'm fine. Like if you want to have like a really cool debate, like I am all for it. But when you're just stating simple facts out there, and especially when they're against like proven facts, like research based, backed facts, it's like, come on, man. Like, I understand that you sat in the same, 20 tree stands your entire life, and this is the one that you always killed the buck out of, and it's because of this reason that you believe. But you know that doesn't make you a super expert in this stuff.
Yeah, I know. It always comes down to those. You get those arguments, and I'm sure you probably had professors that say this too. It's not not reinventing the wheel with this statement, but you have professors that say the beautiful thing about science is that it's under no obligation to make sense to you. It's like, hey, this is how soil becomes healthy, and this is how we do it, and whatever the case is. But anyway,
yeah.
So a lot of people in this space know who you are, right? But let's just every show just introduce who we're talking to today. Who are you? Where you're from? How'd you grow up to lead you down the path of becoming a wildlife biologist?
Oh man, so
the loaded question.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Southwest Pennsylvania.
Where
grew up just south of Pittsburgh, about 40 minutes.
Yeah, because I'm over here in Northeast Ohio. I'm about 20 minutes from Youngstown, so Pittsburgh's only about an hour and a half from me.
Yeah, so you're about 2 hours from me.
I knew you were over around that way somewhere. I just couldn't remember where.
Yeah, so I grew up closer to Pittsburgh.
That's what I meant, closer, yeah.
Yeah, than where I live right now, but grew up in this area, hunted my whole life, and I've always been a deer hunter, like a deer kind of guy. But I hunted turkeys. I was a huge grouse hunter back in the day, when there actually were grouse around. And
yeah.
It was one of those things, like I was kind of a screw off in high school. I didn't really know what I was going to do, and at some point it came across my desk that it was like, well, you could be in wildlife, and to me, I kind of instantly related that to like, oh, I can work with deer, and so I went to Penn State for my bachelor's in wildlife and fisheries. I guess my summer of my sophomore year, going into my junior year, I lucked out and I worked at the Penn State deer pens. I got an internship over there. And what was cool about that is we were funded, we had a little bit of game commission work, but we were funded by the USDA. So at that time, we were doing a lot of the immunocontraceptive research, which was a big deal back then in terms of overpopulation in suburban and urban areas. So it was really cool, hands-on. It was my first chance to like really dive in, and dude, it was such a hook. Like it instantly told me, it was like, I want to work with deer. In fact, like my professors would say, listen, like the number of deer positions out there are so few, like you may not want to be as stubborn, as you're saying right now.
Yeah.
But that was just kind of who I was. It was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go full bore at it. So I graduated from Penn State, started applying to master's programs, and for anyone listening that's looking at that or has been through that, it's not like, oh, let me just apply for a master's program at a school. Like you have to apply for a research project, right? And so if there's not a research project aligned with it, you're not going into the wildlife program. So you're literally looking for jobs basically being posted. And in my case, it was deer jobs. And so it was probably, I don't know, February or March after I graduated. I graduated in December, and Mississippi State had a position that came up that was looking at basically antler and body weights from the different regions of Mississippi. And this is a Pennsylvania guy looking at this stuff, but instantly I'm kind of drawn in. I know you've had Damaris and Strickland on here, and so they'll laugh at this. My quantitative skills were off the charts. My verbal skills were like English was a second language to me. So I was not very strong when it came to the verbal aspect of things. Strong enough that I tested well enough, had the interview with Steve Damaris, and got accepted.
So you interviewed with Steve?
I interviewed with Steve, yeah. And at that time, I had been in the QDMA realm for a while, right? So I knew Kip, obviously Joe, I knew Matt Ross, I knew Craig Harper, knew Carl Miller. Carl was a Pennsylvania guy, so like that was kind of my idol type guy. And I knew of Damaris and Strickland, but, Mississippi just seemed so far, from what I was used to. And so, I have this interview with them and goes well. And I remember getting the acceptance letter and I almost questioned it, man, which was so crazy now thinking back because, I didn't know what I was walking into, but it was like I had an offer from Delaware on the table, which obviously was closer to home. And I had a pending offer with Craig Harper, who I talked to numerous times for Tennessee. And so, and Craig's was kind of still, well, we're not real sure yet. Delaware was on the table, and then Mississippi State. And it basically came down to, did I want to work with Habitat, which was Delaware's project, or did I want to work with like the physical, biological, and anatomical side of deer, which have been antlers and body weight? And that was kind of more my realm, at least at that point.
Yeah, hands-on. I'm the same way. So I actually started off in veterinary medicine, so my bachelor's training was biology, but it was real hardcore molecular anatomy, physiology, that kind of thing. And for me, I knew I wanted to be a wildlife veterinarian. That's what I wanted to do. So for me, I definitely wanted to get my hands on. And after grad school, I went to Virginia Tech, and they had some opportunities there that I regret turning down. I got offered a PhD position working with deer. Like you said, there was a project that came up, and I was like, I got a newborn, man. Like I can't do that. I got to go back home. I got my family. I can't be in school and only make $20,000 a year.
I know, man.
Like I would love to, but I can't do it. I look back on it now, and I've got a good family that would have supported it, and helped out and everything like that. But I'm like, God, dude, but now, it's looking back on it, working with the physical animal is physical anything. That's what it is. I mean, Habitat's great. Don't get me wrong. I love working with Habitat.
Basis. The foundation. Yeah.
Yep. I love creating the artwork, the masterpiece, if you will, and then watch it come to, maturation there and everything start becoming successful, so, but yeah, when you're in the deer pens, like, and you had that experience too. I'm curious because, you talk about the contraception and stuff, that's always a hot topic with urbanized deer, up here, where I am, Cuyahoga County and other, municipal counties are very, very urbanized. And, I've actually got one of my colleagues at the university where I teach in the biology department is doing a big deer project right now that I'm kind of helping him consult on. And, it's an overpopulation thing and it's a habitat, destruction thing. And, we won't get too much into that, but it's always interesting. Did you actually get to do anything with urban deer, or were you guys just studying different contraception methodologies in order to be incorporated into those management strategies?
Yeah, so we were looking purely at the effectiveness of the different contraceptive drugs to then be applied in that actual real world scenarios. So we were trying to take it as a closed environment and say, okay, in the most controlled setting possible, if we hit these deer with these different drugs, right, what is the actual rate of, sterilization, I guess, in these scenarios. And you had some that performed really well, right? And you had some that didn't perform at all, and a lot of times it was, well, what's the reality of the treatment, right? In a real world scenario. I mean, we did that there, and we did it in, you mentioned Virginia Tech. I worked in Front Royal at the Smithsonian property as well. Like, we had a lot of those different places where, you had to get your hands on these deer. Well, when you think about the amount of resources and labor into that, not to mention the stress on the animal, in a real world situation, it's damn near impossible to actually apply that, right?
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, and I've had conversations with I don't want to say focus groups, but, local interest groups and stuff. And it's like, you guys don't understand like how much it's going to spend or how much it's going to cost, the taxpayers, and then, what we're using, like you said, you're using CO2 powered dart guns or whatever it is. It's like, what if you miss?
Half those darts didn't even go off.
Yeah. And now you got
it was crazy.
Yeah, now you got a dart lying around some kid can pick up, if you can find. It's just, there's a lot of things that go on with that. And I'm like, you guys are just so opposed to the urban deer hunting, type of thing. It's just, it blows my mind.
Well, and you were still overpopulated. That was the big thing at the end of the day. It's like, listen, if you're overpopulated now and you sterilize those animals, but you don't remove them, right? For the next several years, you're still overpopulated, right? And once you do remove some of those deer, you're going to sponge effect new ones in. They don't have to reproduce in that same herd, right? They can reproduce and move in from outside of that area. So it was just, logically, it was trying to appease that group who was very anti, don't kill the deer type of thing. We don't want a hunting here. But in the long term, it's just, the applicability of it in the real world just didn't exist.
No, it really still doesn't. I mean, there's not really any good treatments other than, I mean, if you look at the success of urban deer hunting programs, it's like, it's better than, the millions that get spent on, sterilization, whether it's, hysterectomies, darting and completely, doing surgical procedures that they have going on. It's just like, come on, man. But anyway, that's good. So, at Mississippi State, you got to do all that stuff, which is anybody who's listening and knows Bronson, knows Steve. I mean, that's like the Mecca. There's a lot of great deer programs out there, but I think it's pretty Mississippi State. If you're talking about actually deer pens and what goes on at research level, I think Mississippi State's up there as far as, top one, top two. I didn't go there. I know you're going to say it's number one, but I'm going to leave some room. I'm going to leave some room.
Well, listen, I mean, there are good ones. Like Georgia, I will give Georgia and Auburn are both really good.
Michigan State does good too.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of really good schools. The thing I loved about Mississippi State is, number one, is the foremost research that we did was all with a purpose of applicability to the average hunter, right? And so, like, everything that we were doing, even though we were trying to look at, how long did some of these maternal effects last on deer, from different regions and stuff of Mississippi on the same feed, with the same age and environment when we moved them into areas. The ultimate thing was we wanted people in the lower coastal plain to know that if you would enhance the habitat for multiple generations of deer, that you could grow deer that were equivalent or close to equivalent to those that we saw in the Delta region, right? It was just the habitat that was holding them back, for generations and generations. So, there's this evolution, ecology type science behind everything. But the end result was to be able to tell the local landowner, like, hey, listen, man, if you do the right habitat work here over the next generation, you're eventually going to see that result on the quality of the animals on your property.
That's a key there is next generation. People are like, oh, if I do it this year, like,
no, not
180 this year. Is that what you're telling me? It's like, no. Yeah, no. So, one of the things there leading into, and you can I'm going a little fuzzy off memory here, but I think your thesis, your master's project, was it the buck score technology?
It was. So coincidentally,
how'd that go?
Yeah. So coincidentally, I met my wife down there, Emily. And so Emily was on the same project as me, which at one point, and I don't know if we've ever even got it out of Damaris, if he knew we were dating at the time or not, because we were together for 3 years under this project. And eventually he knew because we got married. But so her project was basically this comparison of the coastal plain, the Lurse region, and the Delta, right? And looking at these bucks, body weight and antler size over multiple years and generations to see if it would change if you put them on the same feed, let them age in the same environment. So now we had all these kind of hands-on deer. And so when I got there, we didn't really know what we were going to do, right? We just kind of knew we were going to have all this data, right? And what was something that we could spin out of all this data. And so at some point it was Bronson and Steve and Dr. Stephen Webb, who's in Texas now. We were all kind of just sitting around, and it came about. It was like, man, how cool would it be to be able to score these deer from a photograph? Like, we have all this data, we know what they score. Because before that, you didn't have deer walking around in pens or captures that you knew the actual score of, right? We were tranking these deer and measuring the antlers, so we knew what the actual score was. And they're like, well, yeah, man, like this would be fantastic. Like, what a big management applicability to be able to score deer that, what is it? Probably 1 out of 40 deer bucks that we actually get our hands on, right? The other 39 are walking around the woods. We never get our hands on them to actually score them, to know what they would score in hand. And so we used landscape level GIS on a micro level to develop a system that would allow us to take a photograph of a deer, 2-dimensional photograph of a deer, and turn it into a 3-dimensional estimate of, every antler measurement on that deer as if you had it in your hands. And that was my thesis, that and the aging portion of it. In transparently, like any thesis, we didn't know if it was going to work. We had no idea. We had the data, but just because you have all the data and you're trying to map it out doesn't mean that it's going to be anything that's applicable to be used in research in the future. It just so happens, like when we started to put these models together, the accuracy that we were seeing being predicted out of these models was pretty damn shocking. Within 3% of the actual score. So you're talking about on a 200-inch buck, you're plus or minus 6 inches, which is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Maybe your keyboard warriors will argue that,
but. All right, everybody, we're back. Sorry about that. So had a little hiccup here in the studio. But yeah, so you were talking about the buck score technology and that being your thesis. So how that whole thing went. I mean, what is it with it now? I mean, are you guys still actively using that?
Yeah.
Is that something you still guys use?
Yeah, we are. In fact, we're kind of on like the next phase of it, right? I mean, so we everything that we've done to this point, we took from a scientific approach to call it an end consumer piece to an actual iPhone and Android app. And the key to that is you basically have to measure a facial feature which scales the photo. Then you measure the antlers or draw on the antlers, and that's going to translate into that 3-dimensional estimate on the antler size. Where we're at now, and we're pretty far down the rabbit hole, is we're working on a lot of the machine learning and AI side of it, to where essentially we're taking away, the couple things that were the effectiveness on the error, which would have been the actual measuring of the facial feature and the actual measuring of the antlers, right? That was where the user variation would come in. Like if you measured an ear and I measured an ear, likely they're not going to be exactly the same. So those types of things brought in a little bit extra variation. And so what we're doing with this machine learning side is we're essentially teaching the software to identify those and estimate those without you having to touch it. And so, that's kind of the big step here, call it machine learning, call it artificial intelligence. That's where it's heading, is to where, if a picture of a deer is uploaded into the Buckscore app, it's going to go through and scan it via the machine learning, put it through the algorithms, pump you out a score in, 10 seconds.
So yeah, the AI thing is interesting, because Dr. Lavretsky, his episode isn't, by the time people hear this, his episode will be out. He's a big waterfowl. He's a wildlife geneticist.
Yep.
He works. You know who he is?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, actually, I'm in talks with him about him coming on as one of my co-chairs for my PhD. So
it would be awesome.
Yeah. So because we're going to be so I do a lot of the hen house nesting structures. I belong with Delta Waterfowl, our local branch here. And so we put these hen house structures out. And after I got wind of his research, I was like, shit, man, I'm like, wait a minute. So we've got this domestic, breed of farm raised mallard, it's game bird mallard. And I'm starting seeing these numbers. And he just published a paper in March of this year, early March, that they surveyed, I think 300 or 400 mallards in Northwest Ohio, and 65% of those birds captured had genetic material of farm raised mallard in it. So they were not 100% pure North American wild mallard. So my thing is, again, going back to that, those people listen and maybe want to advance, their education and find a project. You start thinking like a scientist, right? Mine was, well, if that's the case, my sister has, farm ducks and stuff like that. So I said, okay, well, what do people do? They have nesting boxes and, these things are used to, that's just what they're used to doing. I said, so are we exaggerating the increase? Are we with these hen house nesting structures, are we providing opportunities for these individuals that otherwise are not fit enough to survive, whether it's breeding, finding food, all of the above? Are we providing artificial nesting habitat for them, safe away from predators out on the water, giving them more successful viability, if you will, to that? So we're going to start, getting all the permits, and we're going to start capturing ducks and sending, tissue samples to the lab and looking at these ducks that we're finding on these structures to say, hey, maybe 50 or 60% have 10% or above, type of thing. Or are we seeing a good mixture to where doesn't really matter, we're seeing a good mixture of everything, right? I mean, that's kind of the next question, as we're doing all these things. Because if you talk to him, and I've talked to other peoples west of the Mississippi that are using these hen house structures, They very rarely get used. Now, obviously, prairie pothole region completely different
Yeah,
because
completely different.
completely different. But if you're talking about Southwest, United States, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, these places like this where we have mallards, right? They're not being utilized very much. So,
No.
question is why? Is that because we know there's higher prevalence of wild genetic mallards out there versus what we see here in the Atlantic and Mississippi flyways. Jeez, I had a brain fart there for a minute. So bringing him on. But anyway, where I was going with that is he's looking at morphological characteristics. So physical characteristics that you can look at bill length compared to body size and all these different things that just like you're doing with deer, AI is going to be able to generate and say, hey, this duck probably has, some, whatever level of, game farm mallard, material within it. So it's just really interesting stuff because now you can get more samples as AI gets better, whether it's for measuring deer antlers, whether it's measuring, morphological features for waterfowl. Now waterfowl hunters you can get samples from them by looking at, taking a photo of that duck, just like people will with the deer, that you have with your technology and being able to score those. So the management level data that we'd be able to get from that would be really influential. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I mean, think about like even, when I was working on buck score was 16 years ago when I started, and for 3 years, right, we had 4 to 8 people at a time handling deer, physically measuring deer, doing all this stuff. Well, now think of if you develop a program that's machine learning to get those same, measurements. I mean, it's a fraction of the time and resource cost, right? You can expand what you're actually putting to work there in terms of research projects because, what was the heavy lifting load of your actual research project and budget is now diminished greatly because you're able to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to collect all that data.
Yeah. No, it's just super. It's just awesome. Like I look at it now and I'm like, this is just such a good time to, be in this field because, my buddy Chad owns Exodus, trail cameras and everything. So I was over there not too long ago and they had the buyback, trail camera promo that they actually just did again. But got to see like someone submitted one of the old ones. You actually put the camera like in the box. I'm like, imagine going. Yeah, it's awesome to look at that. And he was like, I'm keeping that for display. But I'm like, think of going back to the early days of wildlife management to where that is to where we are now, where we've got these telemetry trackers that can tell us exactly where that deer is at any moment in time. We've got AI that we're going to be utilizing for measuring deer. I mean, it's super cool. And you got the apps that are out there on your phone for mapping technologies and incorporating GIS into hunting and land management. Like I can see where people get overwhelmed because I mean, I don't know how you felt, but even me coming out of school, even grad school, as things change, I feel like I'm learning. I'm back in school again, like learning all of these new things and like, well, shit, we did it this way. Now we're going to have to do it this way because this just makes more sense. Like I have it.
Well, dude, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's changed the space. I mean, you talked about the map side of things. I remember where the only way I could do those maps besides Google Earth was through ArcGIS, right? Which was a very expensive subscription, right? Yeah. And in fact, that's where a lot of your map makers like HUNTR and these guys, like, I mean, they were all making an ArcGIS. Well, then all of a sudden, this becomes a publicly available resource, basically. And it's like, that's number one, takes a big hit to their business plans. But number two, it's like, holy shit, this is a lot easier than what I had to deal with.
Yeah.
It just is that, and it's good, right? It's good, positive evolution. Now, I think the question is how people utilize that stuff in their hunting and their management is where there's almost a morality line, basically.
Yeah. All right. So Mississippi State did that. Now you get out of school, you and your wife. Did you guys get married while you were in school, after school?
We did. Yep. While we were in school. Yep. Finish up school. So I graduated in 2010 from Mississippi State. We both did.
Oh, so we graduated about the same time then.
Yep. 2010.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I immediately went and ran the buck score company for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. And then got a job at Cabela's as a wildlife biologist.
Yep. I was going to go into that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of my first step. The first step into the industry was working under this capital group with buck score. And man, I was a 20-some-year-old kid, trial by fire. I didn't know anything about the industry besides like the products I used. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about, finances and stuff. I was a biologist,
Yeah.
right? And you throw me in this position to run this company, which was my baby at the time. But at the kind of looking back on it, it's like, man, I didn't have any of the skills to run a company at all. But sometimes that's the best way to learn as well.
Yeah, trial by fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew you guys. I couldn't remember if I knew you had a consulting company with your wife for a little while, and I couldn't remember if it was just called Buck Score or what you guys had. But
so we did, we had Flinn Wildlife for a while, and then that kind of merged into having like the Buck Score side of things, and eventually it kind of turned into Buck Advisor. And we still do a little bit of the Buck Advisor.
Buck Advisor, yeah.
Yeah, we still do a little bit of consulting. She and I do, but not nearly as much as I used to in the past, traveling around the country and stuff.
Yeah, it gets you get a little burnout on that. I mean, I traveled all through Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Indiana, West Virginia. I mean, I drive a lot. I got a 2021 Ram that I bought brand new with like 9 miles on it, and I've got 114,000 miles.
Buried it, yeah. Just buried it.
I'm like, it's my office, man.
But that's it, man. That's it.
So going into consulting, so I always like talking to other consultants. For people listening, what were some of the common mistakes that you saw a lot, of the time with some of your clients? Focus on the Midwest. I mean, that's
yeah.
I guess you really can focus anywhere. It doesn't have to be Midwest, but I know that people always thinking like, I wonder if I'm making that mistake.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is, I guess, two big things. Number one, from a pure, like, if we're trying to manage the property side of things, right? The number one thing I saw was, and I'm guilty of this, I'll go into it in a second, but was lack of timber cutting. It was easy for me as a consultant to walk in and say, well, listen, you got a closed canopy here, you got too many oaks in here, like, you got to open this up, you got to create bedding, you got to create nesting. The moment I bought my first property and I talked to somebody about cutting timber, I immediately felt what they felt, which was like, I don't really know if I want to cut that tree for $400, and it wasn't as much the money side as it was like, this is I'm looking at a 60-plus-year-old red oak, right? And you're telling me it's worth $400. Like, there's a magical being there in front of me that you're going to cut down. Now, from a wildlife side, I completely get it. And the habitat, that's why it was easy on the consulting side. But as the landowner side, I mean, once that tree's gone, right, I'm never going to see anything in that place in my lifetime. So I think across the board, the number one thing I saw was the lack of timber cutting on a property, or the fear of timber cutting on a property.
Yeah, I would say that too. I mean, I'm a huge timber guy. I love cutting timber. I love, doing those management recommendations. I love cruising timber and doing all that kind of stuff. In undergrad, one of my professors, who's still a big mentor of mine today, a certified forester, went to Duke. He taught all of those, professional classes, forestry, soils, all those things. In those classes. So I gravitated towards those, and that's, long story where I got here. But yeah, I would say that's probably the number one thing. And in a vast majority of the time when I deal with people, it's always like, okay, I want to show you, here's my ideas on what I want to plant here, I'm like, man, chainsaw and just some time and some herbicides. Like, even going with you see that big mature oak. Okay. Put that on next year's plan, put that on 2 years plan. Like, go along this 90-degree edge that you have. And I'm going to teach you how to make a measurement of a tree in DBH. And we're going to go through here, and anything 8 inches and below that you can easily take down with a chainsaw and not hurt yourself, type of thing. And go in here and just do some work on the edge line. Like, bolster your edge line, make, successional.
It was never even a discussion with half of these guys, right? The immediate thing was like, I got 2 acres here. What do I plant?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I still have those. And I tell them, I'm like, listen, here in the Midwest, our limiting factor is cover. It's not food.
Yeah, correct.
I'm like, your neighbors have corn. This neighbor has soybeans. This one's got corn and soybeans. And you've got manicured lawn fescue. Like, I agree, you need some stuff. But listen, what you plant here is not going to hold and draw deer here. But what you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in when you're surrounded by heavy ag with closed canopy timber is if you open up your canopy and make a thicker timber patch. That's going to bring deer in and hold them. Now they're still going to finger out to those other properties and eat, but you are going to be the property that has something that none of the others have, rather than trying to compete with what they have.
And I mean, that's the biggest thing that we talked about this earlier, where people start to gravitate to what they see on YouTube and stuff like that. And it's like, listen, if you're in, like, I've got a property in Southern Ohio, right? It's pasture ground around me and big timber, right? If you listen to some of the people online, they would say, don't plant any corn, right? You don't need any corn because there's corn all over the place. There's no corn around me except for the yellow piles being dumped, right? There's no standing corn anywhere around there. And so for me, like, if I would establish a field, like a 2 or 3 acre field of corn, that's going to be a super attractive piece in October and November. Whereas if you have thousands of acres of corn around you that doesn't get harvested October, November, your little 2 acre corn plot isn't going to do anything for you, right? Has no value there. So that's where, when people start to try, and I get it, man, I'm all for sucking in the information, but you got to take everything with a little bit of grain of salt and understand, what are they telling you and where are they at? And now, what is your property? Is it an apples to apples? Well, likely not, right? Likely it's very different than what they're saying of, hey, like, don't worry about, doing any timber cuts because, you've got so much cover here. And you look around and you're like, I can see straight through these woods to the other field. There's no cover, right? That doesn't exist. So I think that in itself is kind of if there's mistakes being made, right? It's frankly probably listening to people that I'm not saying are wrong, but what they're talking about is their situation, which is not your situation.
It's out of context for your situation.
That's it. That's what it comes down to.
And I've said this multiple times. You've heard me say it, but a lot of it too, it's you can't really post about that. Like, there's nothing cool photoed. Like, I'm gonna do all this work and I can't even like show anybody, man. Like, that is a part of it, whether people want to admit it or not. And we're in the game too. I mean, I don't know how much you do it anymore because you've been in a lot longer than I have. But being younger in the game now, with the podcast and everything, it's like every time I see something like that'd be a good photo. That's a good post. It's just like, damn it. I hate that I'm starting to think like that.
Oh, dude, you should see it. And I mean, we try to block it out. Like I'm not on it that often because it's beyond me. But like our TikTok channel is like the bottomless pit of hate. Because we'll put one clip out there and like, it's literally thousands of keyboard warriors just telling me how I'm an idiot. And it's fine. Listen, part of the stuff that we do is to stoke the fire. Like, that's why we do it. But ultimately, it's like you hear all the opinions. The biggest one I got, and I get this, right? Because obviously, like, I'm a conservative guy. Like, I get where kind of the country is in the state of things. But the biggest thing that I got is I went on a rant about, basically the hunting license side of things, right? And hunter education. And essentially just saying, listen, like, there's plenty of people that walk into a Walmart that never took a hunter education course that will hand them a driver's license and walk out with a hunting license, right? And that is the barrier to entry for us, right? Not to mention the conservation dollars and everything over top. The barrier of entry to hunt is you take a hunter safety course. Well, the immediate backlash that we saw was just another government regulation, like, I don't need a license to do this. Hunting's a right, blah, 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 down that pathway. And it's like, listen, man, I get it. But if you have no boundaries on this stuff, right, you eventually have no wildlife. It's gone, right? And it's just what was just so shocking was the number of people that thought that way.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And immediately it put me kind of back to say, like, look at some of, whether it's Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, look how we do our harvest report numbers in terms of people who was hunting and stuff. Now think of all the people that just told me that they don't need a license. You think they're checking a harvest too? Hell no.
No. Well, and it's like that in Ohio too. Now, I mean, I don't know, you guys have, we haven't had game check stations in a while. They got rid of those a while ago. Yeah. It's like, you think everyone's reporting everything?
You think they're telechecking?
Yeah.
No.
I know people that aren't reporting everything, you know,
No.
and it's just like, I mean, it is what it is. People can do you, right? It is what it is, you know, but that's just the state of things. And I really sympathize with the state agencies, you know, I think for the most part, because they are handcuffed. I've talked with Tonkovich. I've talked with,
Yep.
you know, all those guys, and they're great guys. They're great
Yeah.
biologists, and they've got such a mind, you know, for whitetails and the management. But you know, their backs to the corner, man.
Well, yeah,
you
that's
know,
it, man. I was going to ask you, do you think guys like Tonk and them are, because the criticism that I have, and it's not to them as much as it is to the kind of the station of agencies in general, is, you know, the communication to the public, right? Is that,
yeah,
you know, basically it's either super vague, right, or it's a canned response. That's it. Those are the two things, right? There is no, the one guy who's doing it right now, who was my former supervisor, is Chad Stewart in Michigan. Chad
oh, okay,
literally has his own Facebook page as the deer and elk biologist up there, of which he could just, whatever they want, you know, just let it rip, and he'll address some of them. But if you think about some of these other states, you know, and I don't know if it's the commission board or if it's the upper admins, but I mean, dude, there's a wall between our biologists and the general public.
yeah, there is. Another thing too is there's not many of them. You know, like in
No,
Ohio, there's not a lot. You know, I mean,
no.
shit. I just learned. I've lived here for 39 years. I just learned that Ohio has a dedicated waterfowl biologist. Now, I know that, you know, like, I mean, common sense would tell you
You
that
would
we
think
have a
so.
representative that is going to deal with Ohio for us being in the Mississippi Flyway, like whatever. I did a podcast with a guy from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And, you know, I was like, hey, by the way, off air. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's this guy. He gave me the name. I got the two guys. I'm like, get the hell out of here. I'm like, why is that not? And with the
Yeah.
thing, the whole mallard thing that's going on right now really aggravates the shit out of me. Like, the fact that, you know, I've talked to people about this, my close buddies we all waterfowl hunt and everything. I'm like, here's the problem. As like, you guys don't care. And I said, I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
that to sound shitty, but you don't care. You're going to sit there and this fall, we're going to go out there and smack our limit of mallards every time we go out, like we do all the time. Right.
Yep.
My concern is guys like you and I was talking to Phil about this, Dr. Lebretsky. I said, guys like us or people like us, you know, we see the data, we see things happening in real time. When you tell me 65% of the mallards in my state, and that now is given it was localized, right? But still, you're
Yeah.
telling me 65. The last report, if I remember right, I think Phil did something, I think in 2020. I heard him on another podcast in 2019 or 2020. That number was 50%. So let's just be conservative and say 2019. So you're telling me in 4 years it increased 15%.
I'd be worried if I was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
waterfowl guy, right?
And I told my buddies this. I said, now I said, how much do you like hunting pheasants
Mm-hmm.
and quail, or, you know, and they're like, it's fun, right? Because I've got short hair pointers.
Yeah.
So, you know, they like going out with me. I was like, yeah, it's fun. I've got some clients, some friends of mine that have preserves that, you know, we kind of trade some services, and I get my dogs on birds, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I'll take these guys with me, you know, and we have a good time. But, you know, I sit there and say, so you're telling me that, I said, what I'm trying to tell you is that there is a possibility. Now, maybe I'm overhyping it, but with numbers like that and numbers that we're seeing in the Atlantic Flyway, where 95+% are, you know, have game farm mallard, you know, DNA in them. Dude, if something's not done, like, there's going to be a time we're going to hunt waterfowl like we do pheasants.
Yeah. It's all put and take.
Yeah. I'm like, I said, so now do you want to pay for the farms to raise? I said, look at pheasants. I think Pennsylvania last year, the year before, I think they released something like 200,000 pheasants.
Mm-hmm.
And Ohio did like 20,000. Maybe my numbers are off there or something, but it was.
Well, but we also pay, I think it's $26 for a pheasant tag.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is you look at, like, there's other states that allocate a lot more money. I said, looking at my state in Ohio, I'm like, imagine if we had to go that route with waterfowl. The economic toll that's going to take. And plus, do you think hunters are going to be happy and going to buy the Ohio wetland stamp? You think they're not going to? Imagine the amount of birds you would have to raise, mallards you would have to raise to satisfy the waterfowl hunter demand. It's a big problem, you know, and it's the same thing. You kind of, you know, you can talk about the same thing with deer, you know, as people just, you know, you get people like you were talking about, right? And people are just, our history as a nation is just riddled with horrible cases and examples of what we've done to North American wildlife.
Yeah.
And that's why we have the North American conservation model, right? I mean, it's wise because some of the stuff we've done. And I think though, some of that, I mean, first of all, I don't read comments. Excuse me. I could give two shits. You could say whatever. I don't read it. It doesn't bother me. So, but when I hear people, you mentioned things like that, I tend to wonder, maybe other side of the coin is people react like that just off the cuff because of how society's going to.
Oh, absolutely.
And like, if you really talk with them, do they really believe that? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, if you really had a conversation with them, I bet you a majority of those guys would completely understand with what, either, biologists like us are saying, or like, hey, listen, let's talk about this. Look at this from this standpoint. Like, this is why you need a hunt. Yeah. Okay. I think most of them would understand that, but I think some people are so politically divided right now that you mention anything and they're like, F that, dude. Like,
well, that's what the reaction was. And exactly. I was quick to jump on it and say, almost make a summary and say, okay, well, that's because you don't care about wildlife and the future of hunting like I do, right? And that's selfish of me to say that, because I do think that it is probably more fueled by like what you just said in the political atmosphere of things, and government regulation and big government and things like that's their mindset. Because I think most of those people, if you said, well, listen, man, we don't, if there's no regulations, they'll say, whoa, I'm not saying that, I just want, free for all on the deer and stuff. Like, there's still a deer season and we still mind with bag limits. I'm just saying I don't need a license to go do that. Right. Yeah. So it's a weird approach because of the way that government has stepped in on that side. And I don't know, man, again, we kind of talked about it earlier. Like, my ear to the ground is not as good as it used to be on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. But a couple of things I thought were interesting that I looked at the other day. Number one is I was looking at licensed archery hunter trends and stuff. Pennsylvania is now number one in the country. It's like 331,000 licensed archery hunters. Ohio was like 180 or something. So that was kind of shocking. But the other thing I saw in Pennsylvania, and I don't know if this is true, is that 8% of the Game Commission's revenue came from license sales. The majority of it came from resources, meaning oil, gas, timber on the properties. And if that is a fact, which I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying I saw that as an 8% versus I think it was 56 on the resource side. It begs the question again, because of the state of the country, of, well, where are they loyal to me if I'm only bringing 8% in? I don't know. Yeah. Or I mean, and maybe it's not loyal as much as it is, are their decisions inevitably have to be based on the natural resources of oil, gas, timber, because that's the revenue, not as much as what do the hunters want.
Oh, those are fun numbers.
And again, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that's what came across the other day on some stuff. And, not every state has that luxury of resources being like that. Ohio obviously still has a pretty strong oil, gas pocket, and has obviously great timber on a lot of the lands. But, why I say that is these are the things I think that creep in on people very quickly in the state of where our country is. And it's going to negatively affect our wildlife, inevitably.
Yeah, and it's, going back to the education piece, I mean, you hear, I got Tonk coming on next week or so, we're going to talk, Ohio whitetails, but, it's you hear, name your state where the whitetail is, elk, whatever the species you want to put into this. Anytime a regulation changes or something's proposed, like, I mean, I don't hear about it until it's like implemented. I mean, again, I'm with you. Like, my ear's not down to the ground like it should be, for someone who talks about this stuff and whatever. But I mean, there's just so much, you can only focus on so much. But that's a thing too, is the education standpoint, I think all across the board could be better. I mean, no matter what it is. Like, I had an issue the other day where I needed to get a hold of a game warden, and I went to the ODNR website, the list of all the game wardens. I called numbers. It went straight to voicemail. And it's like, if this is what I'm like, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you now. you know, and it's like, I mean, is there a way that maybe I overlooked? Probably. Someone will probably call me out on it, but if that's the case, then why is it not on that page that says Ohio, you know, game warden officers per county with their numbers? And maybe I missed it. You know, I was in a hurry and a little bit aggravated, you know, but I'm like, here it is, opening weekend of turkey. What if I needed someone because, you know, I got a poacher on my property, guy, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's going to take me however long, you know, I probably overlooked something, but still, I'm like, it should be like right there, you know.
I mean, those are the things that people piggyback on, though, and immediately fine. And again, nobody is perfect, right? We get that aspect of it, but there's a lot of things. I think you made a good point in terms of the regulation thing, because we had a big discussion on this the other day. My ear's not down to everything, but it is obvious that they are not trying to advertise those bill changes and those law changes, right? They're not out there on social media, which is the best tool to use in today's society, to say, hey guys, just so you know, in the next 4 weeks, we're going to have this discussion on bill X and it's doing this. What do you think? Doesn't happen, right? Instead it's, hey, we've got a meeting coming up Wednesday at 3 p.m. Sorry, you're working. If you could be there, great, voice your opinion.
They can make it virtual. You know, you can do virtual stuff.
They'll stream it on YouTube, but you're not going to say anything that's going to make an impact, you know?
No, that's the thing. And I don't have an answer for it. You know, I couldn't imagine being in those shoes. You know, everyone's got a boss, you know, and it's one of those to, you know, who's above you and what's their agenda type of thing. And, you know, what's your resources and fun. I mean,
I couldn't do it, man. That's why I went private consulting out of the gate. Is like, my wife worked for Missouri Department of Conservation as a deer biologist for 5 years. And so I heard it firsthand from her, and it was like, there was no way I would have been fired.
Yeah.
Like,
same way.
I would have kept my mouth shut.
I had a small stint with a government agency doing some environmental, you know, work. And I lasted a little under a year. This isn't worth it. You know, for me, it was kind of like, well, I ultimately want to be like a, you know, regional biologist or something like that. And I was like, maybe this is a stepping stone to get into the system and, you know, easier transition, you know, that kind of thing. And I was like, nope, this isn't it, you know, and, you know, I just remember that position. Like I would get like talked to about like over helping. You know, because I went to that position working, you know, 8 years as a private consultant.
You're ready to gun, man.
And I'm like, hey, man, like I can tell you the entire process of this. You know, I can tell you that here's what to expect. Here's what you're, you know, it just was like, you know, and you get people in charge that just shouldn't be, you know, and I was like, this is not for me, man. I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. You know, so.
Well, dude, so one thing I would ask on that, you know, and I saw this at Mississippi State kind of as I was leaving, so I'd be curious to see what Virginia Tech was like too, is we saw a really big push as I was leaving away from hook and bullet students and towards conservation biology students. And it was pretty staggering. I'm not saying it was everybody, but there weren't many of us in the wildlife and fisheries department who were the future of a lot of state agencies that were active, you know, consumptive users, basically.
Well, so I'll actually go a little bit more nuanced, because when I was at Virginia Tech, I think that the people that I knew, most of us were hunters, like, you know, fishermen, you know, outdoorsmen. I mean, I can think of a few that weren't, but I kind of stayed to myself a little bit. But I would say more now that I'm teaching at a big Division I school, you know, and I teach in the Department of Biological Sciences, but we have, you know, we have a conservation degree. We don't have a wildlife degree at Kent State. It's a conservation science degree, and then there's an environmental science degree. So, you know, and I even asked Bronson about this, and I asked Bronson, and I think I asked Marcus about it, maybe Will too. I can't remember, but I'm curious. I know we were going with this question, and I'm curious about the same thing. Because I'll get a class, like I teach upper division classes, so I'll teach the special topics classes, forestry, wildlife resources, those kind of things. So I get them in their junior, senior year, getting ready to graduate, you know, whatever it is, trying to decide what they want to do. So I would say, who wants to work in, conservation and work, for the state or something like that. Right. I just kind of get an idea what everyone wants to do.
Yep.
And people raise their hand. I'm like, now, how many of you in here hunt? How many in here, hunt or have a family that, is big in the outdoors? And maybe you don't, which is absolutely fine, but you have an appreciation for it. Right.
Yep.
And I have to talk about those things because, for me, and those hands go like this. A lot of them go down. And now my concern is that in the next 5, 10, 15 years, these are the individuals that are making the management recommendations for our game species across the United States. Now, maybe that's not as, at surface level, it's pretty bad, and like I said, I even tell my students, I'm like, you don't misunderstand me. You don't have to be a hunter to be successful, but you have to have an appreciation for what hunters do, not only for your agency, but also for the wildlife, the game species that you are going to be managing. Whether you work for the Bureau of Land Management, whether you work for the Forest Service, and you're managing timber stands on state lands, maybe it's for managing the resource because that's the revenue driver. You still have to have an appreciation for the wildlife component as well, right? Because that's going to be a big part of it. And then on the other side, we have the conversations with the students too, or I do, is that, who in here hikes, who in here likes to kayak? And it's like, what do you feel if someone comes in and says, hey, you have to get a permit to hike, the public lands in the state of Ohio? They would lose their mind.
They would lose their mind.
Right? They lose their mind. But it's like that blacktop trail that you walk to or whatever, most of that comes from the revenue generated by hunting licenses, game tags. Now, I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Sure, but that's
when you
where
start,
it's coming from.
Yeah, but when you have those conversations with the students, when you have those conversations with the public, a lot of times they really don't understand the inner workings of how all of this stuff kind of comes together. They don't understand the Pittman-Robertson funds that get allocated. They don't understand these things. And even the non-hunters, it's like, could you imagine the economic hit that would happen if all of a sudden, some of these states just went the way and just the hunting regulations just got so bad that people were like, screw this. I'm not buying a license. I'm not going to buy anything. Could you imagine the economic hit that would happen in this country? It would be, just across the board, like your state, because you're not only going to see it from the wildlife component, you're going to see it from the canoe liveries. You're going to see it from the horseback riding trails. You're going to see it from these things. It's all intertwined, whether you like it or not. And trying to educate people on, that you talked about urban deer earlier, like the insurance companies, people are astonished when I tell them about the billions of dollars that are spent from insurance companies on whitetail deer research.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, what? I'm like, well, yeah, because they don't want to pay for
they don't want
Mercedes
to pay your deductible
that just got smacked.
No, man.
Dude, I hit a turkey the other day. I haven't even been turkey hunting yet, and I've already harvested a bird. Like I smacked this thing in my truck. Heavy urbanized area. Metro park system in the middle of this highly urbanized area where I live, and traffic was bad. I didn't even see it. It was on the road on the other direction. It flew out from it just hit my truck. It was done, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what was that? I knew it was a turkey. I looked it in the eye as it was happening. And then, I obliterated this thing, going 55, and with a ram, just this thing got smacked. But I'm like, there it is right there is you start looking at the management. I start thinking about,
man.
I'm looking right here. I'm like, damn, look how fragmented this is.
Yeah.
I'm like, this thing's just trying. Now, first of all, I'm like, you can fly over the big metal things that are coming at you. My wife gets mad at me. I'm like, it's
not the smartest.
Survival of the fittest here. You're too stupid to fly. But anyway, but that's where it is. I think education is a very, very big problem, and they're definitely aware of it. I've had conversations with Tonk a little bit on the phone. And education's a big thing for him. I saw him down at the Southeast Deer Study Group. The problem is the mechanisms on how to do it. How do you do it effectively? Because people, and I was talking? I was talking to one of my buddies about this the other day. Is like I mentioned with you, people are just so fed up and with the political climate of today that honestly, I don't even know how many people would attend an outreach, event.
They wouldn't. I mean, it's where it needs to happen is in a crazy ass way is utilizing what people are watching today, which is the YouTubes and the social medias and stuff. But you can't be, and this is where the conservation biology thing comes in. Listen, I can go and talk to anybody in the state agency, and I will tell you who is not a hunter when I talk to them. You just
I can
know.
too.
You
Yeah.
just know, right?
I've run into them. Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. And so, and that's no knock to them, right? Because they can manage a wildlife population. What they can't manage is the relation to the people, which is the hardest part. And so when you have somebody sitting there telling me about, whatever the upcoming waterfowl season, and I'm looking at this person thinking, this person's never even been in a pair of waders with a gun in their hand, right? It just hasn't happened. It, it's immediately a loss of credibility to the state agency, immediately, off the charts. Which is why, you start looking at some of the private individuals out there like, Don Higgins and Jeff Sturgis and Grant Woods and, list goes on. I mean, the gravitation to these people is because they are hunters in that space and is everything that those guys say correct? No, not by any means. But it's where most of the public is getting their information because it's like, well, these people are more relatable than the state agency people I'm talking to.
Yeah, and it's just a challenge. I mean, look at the conservation organizations; they've got a challenge too. I mean, you look at like the NDA, the National Deer Association, and look at their numbers compared to how many whitetail hunters there are in the country.
Yeah, I mean, QDMA was around forever, and you would have thought like, oh man, this thing's killing it. I mean, there's a reason it's NDA now and not QDMA.
Yeah, yeah, it's just yeah. I see. I don't know how much you see it, but I've reached out to some people, that work for like U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and it's like always a question. It's like, well, what are your numbers? Blah blah blah. I got to get approval from so and so. I'm like, you know what? Yeah. Never mind.
Yeah, I don't want to deal with it.
I don't want to deal with it. I said, and there's the thing. It's like, okay, who gives a shit? What the numbers are. Like the more podcasts you're on, the more reach that you can get. Like
that's the communication barrier,
that's
man.
part of the game.
I'm telling you, it's the number one thing. You talk to 9 out of 10 hunters in any state and say, do you trust your local DNR, game commission, whatever the heck it is? They'd say no.
Yeah.
In a heartbeat. And it's not because of something that's happened as much as it is the lack thereof of communication. They just don't know what is happening. These people are politicians behind closed doors that are making decisions that affect these hunters' passion of hunting and fishing, yet it could easily be solved by open dialogue.
And it goes both ways too, because I tell people, all the time in different aspects when it comes to management, right? Yep. They're like, this state is, screwing up the deer population. They're allowing over harvest. I was like, oh, really? Now, maybe I don't have the numbers in front of me. Maybe there's an argument for that case. I'm pretty sure you're not going to make that argument. But maybe I'm looking around your property and you don't have shit here for habitat. Yeah. Maybe, it's like looking for, it's like you need to kind of pump the brakes. So it goes two ways. And plus the state of Ohio is 95%, privately owned. Yeah. So you're going to bitch, piss and moan when the state really only manages like 5 or 6% of the state. Mm-hmm. And I'm being conservative with that number. It's like, what are you doing? Did you mail in that hunter survey that they send out? Like as far as what you did, I don't do that every year, but I talk to these guys. I just it goes both ways. Like you can't just sit there and piss and whine, about what's going on at the state level and what's going on with the deer when you're not making any attempt either. I've asked people, I'm like, do you know who's the deer program manager for state of Ohio? No idea. I'm like, you could Google it. It would take you 5 seconds to Google that, and Tonk's name would come up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good information from Tonk out there too.
Dude, he's a great guy. Like I've talked to him multiple times, and I'm excited to have him on. And it's like, have you emailed him?
Yeah.
Have you emailed Clint? Which is his right hand man. It's like he's a great deer biologist. Have you emailed? Talked with Mark Wiley about turkey populations and like. There's no just as much of like, well, the state needs to engage with us. Why? Like you can engage with them on the ODNR's web on their social media page just as much as anything. And it goes again on the other side. Talk about waterfowl hunting, like, and again, maybe before I say this, I probably should have done some research, but hey, that's why we're on here, is we say stuff.
We just shoot that.
Maybe. Yeah. But, I see people on the waterfowl pages talking about, pushing back, or opening up the waterfowl season earlier, but then pushing the split back a little bit, which I'm like, and I've had this conversation. I'm like, biologically, I don't see a problem with that. Right. Because if you want to make the waterfowl hunters in Ohio a lot happier, open up that season earlier to give you more success of getting a blue-winged teal, which are one of the first ones that are gone. You might get lucky. I mean, green wings are going to hang around a little bit longer. They're more cold tolerant. But if you open it up a little bit earlier and you can get a higher probability of smacking a blue wing, like that's pretty good. And then you can offset by opening up earlier by pushing that split a little bit later, and then maybe get a week or two into January. Again, biologically, it's not going to hurt anything from the population standpoint. They're not breeding. They're not reproducing at that time, and the residents are still here, right? They're not coming up from their migratory pathways. So it's like biologically, I understand the frustration, the argument, because I'm out there, I'm like, dude, I can't remember the last time I've shot a blue wing. Yeah. I've seen them, but you're like, holy shit, they're so fast. You're like, yeah.
So I'm not a super waterfowl or duck guy by any means, but the farm lineage DNA has my biologist kind of spidey senses going off. Do you think that at some point that is going to affect those birds' behavior in terms of migration?
Oh, it already is.
So you're going to have more resident birds?
So what happens is, and I'm getting off this from reading Phil's, research and listening to him talk. So what let's see if I paraphrase this here. So what they are finding with these game farm mallards that were bred. So the game farm mallard was bred to be better in captivity, to produce more offspring, right? Because wild mallards just don't breed very well in captivity. So that was the first thing. They wanted higher production, right? So that was the first thing. And you got to think of this as it's like artificial selection, just like we do with dogs, right? So it's okay, I want it to look like a mallard, but I also want it to have high productivity in captivity. I want it to be smaller and faster, so it's more sporty, right? They have less fat reserves. They have the lamella on their bills are wider spaced apart. So that's more for a grain-free Purina type of kibble diet, right? So for people listening, how do ducks feed? Well, they're filter feeders. If you're talking about mallards that are dabbling ducks or puddle ducks, right? They take water into their mouth, and those lamella let the water come out as the seeds and the invertebrates and things like that stay, and they eat them. Right. But now if you have a widening of those lamella, now they can't feed in the wild as much as they normally can. They're not building up the fat reserves, and they're already behind the game. So what Phil is seeing is that specifically in the Mississippi flyway, birds that have a higher prevalence of this game farm mallard DNA hit a migratory wall about northern Tennessee. You don't see, all the telemetry data is showing that you're not seeing them go any further from Tennessee. Now, I think there's two things with this. One, the bird is physically not able to do that. Building up fat, just like in deer, is energy, people. That's why in the deer world, cereal grains and things like that, because why is it? They're high in carbohydrates. They can intake that food. It's immediate glucose for their cells and their tissues, and they don't have to burn that fat reserve. Same thing with waterfowl. When they're building up those fat reserves, it's for that long migratory flight. If you don't have it, you can't use it, right? The other thing I would say is a loss of wetland habitat, good quality wetland habitat. As someone who works a lot with utility companies and does a lot of environmental permitting, most of the wetlands I see are very low quality, emergent, category 1 systems. They don't have very much habitat. Now you got organizations like Delta and Ducks Unlimited that are doing great jobs and things on wetland conservation. So, however, with that, if we add those, now you're giving more frequency stops to, again, allow a less fit bird to now succeed and migrate. And now there's other reproductive things that are going on, characteristics that we see with those birds. But, yes, it already is affecting their migratory pathways, because they just can't, they're smaller and they just can't sustain the flight.
Can't sustain it. That's crazy, man. And I mean, that's the stuff that, again, you could be the hunter who just goes out there and pounds your limit every day. At some point, what happens when you show up and the birds aren't there?
Yeah. Now, and I was talking to Phil about this. I'm like, is this going to be in our lifetime? I don't know.
Probably not. Probably not. I mean, we're talking long generations of evolution.
And I sit there and I'm like, Well, for me, I want to preserve the hunting heritage. Like I want
That's
that to
it.
be something that I got daughters, but they're not, my oldest daughter by no stretch of imagination hunts. My youngest daughter loves fishing and I'm sure she'll hunt with me. I don't push her, but like, she has kids and I get a grandson, or like, I want to go waterfowl hunting with my grandson or my granddaughter or whatever it is, type of thing. So for me, when my friends bring their sons out and I take them pheasant hunting and see the smile on their face, I'm like, shit, man, I wish they could hunt, wild pheasants, in here. And it's one of those to where, people as humans, I think we just don't worry about something until it's a problem. I mean, shit, look at the whole, pandemic response thing. It's like now all of a sudden it's a problem. Now I need something. And I didn't, take any mind of, hey, how, do I have things that if something does happen, maybe the power grid goes out, can I, am I going to be in a panic, type of thing. It's the same thing with wildlife. Like I told you, like my buddies love them to death. They're like my brothers, but they don't care,
it's only going to be responsive.
Yeah. And I see the trend. It's reactionary. It's reactionary, not, taking care of it ahead of time. So for me, that's the concern that I have for a lot of species, man. Like it's just going, that way with obviously things that we see, urban sprawl and development and, habitat fragmentation, all those things. I mean, you look at conservation organizations and you look at, state agencies, they can only do so much.
That's it. They're just setting the landscape level boundaries, right? It's up because of everything being so privately owned, it comes down to a micro level responsibility, right? It's just like if Ohio can tell me I can shoot whatever 5 does, doesn't mean that my property can sustain shooting 5 does, right? Maybe I need to shoot 10 and I need to bring somebody else on there because I got too many, right? It comes down to your level and your judgment call to be able to make that effect on the local wildlife, right? It just because they set it at a landscape level doesn't mean that's just a guardrail, right? That's all that's there for. If you need to shoot more, there's DMAP, right? You figure out how to get in the program and get more tags. You need to shoot less, you just don't shoot as many as they tell you can shoot. It's self-restriction at that point.
Yeah, I'm curious. So you've been a lifelong Pennsylvania guy.
Mm-hmm.
What's it been like growing up and going from a young kid to now? And I'm only asking this question. I like to ask the people from PA because I know nothing about PA hunting. I hunted deer for the first time last year, and I think we were in a DMAP area, and I'm looking around, poor habitat. And I'm not shitting. I'm not shitting you. I've probably seen 60 does.
Oh yeah.
And
crazy,
and I'm just
dude.
and I'm looking around like, holy shit, and I'm and I don't know, and I'm pressing this by I don't know anything about how the state manages a deer. I just don't pay attention. I don't do a lot of work in Pennsylvania. But I've got friends that do hunt Pennsylvania, and I just feel like I don't hear a whole lot of good. Type of thing. Now, that's not the case for all of it, but,
It's changed so much. When I grew up hunting, it was the first, 3-inch spike you saw, right? You dropped. Like, I remember, I think it was 8 or 9. My dad shot like a 2-year-old 8-point, and we paraded that thing around for days, because it was a giant in the mountains. But sometime around when I was in high school, 2001 is when Gary Alt went on his antler restriction kind of binge there, which back to the communication, it's the only guy I've ever seen do anything like that. And I mean, he took every possible beating that he could to the point of kids getting death threats, right? Him wearing bulletproof vests, these meetings. That said, I remember sitting as a, sophomore, junior in high school, I can't remember, listening to this guy talk. And I went in there thinking, screw this dude. Like, he's going to tell us that we can't shoot what we've been shooting for years, right? And I walked out of that meeting saying that was the most impressive thing I've ever heard in my life, because it was like revelation information pushed onto us. Now there was still, again, the impulse of saying, no change is bad. But for the people who actually listened to him, it was like, damn, this makes a lot of sense, guys, right? So that happened in 2000. Antler restrictions came into play, concurrent seasons. You stopped seeing 50 doe and 1 spike come through, right? You started to see less deer, but also the bucks that you started to see were a little better. Fast forward it to today, that buck over my shoulder here, I killed that buck when I was before I went to Mississippi State. So when I graduated from Penn State, that was the biggest buck I'd killed with my bow. Now I pass deer like that multiple times a year. I've got 30 acres right here behind the house. I hunted 2 5-year-olds all year on 30 acres. Now I'm not saying that they lived on 30, right? But I had an opportunity of them on 30 at all given times. So it has evolved to where you surely don't see as many deer. You absolutely see better quality bucks. The habitat, I think, is still the fatal flaw here, right? It's one of the factors, of course. So is avian influenza and stuff, but it's one of the factors around the grouse decline here is the lack of early successional habitat, right? We see these big fern, hardwood, closed canopies, and it's everywhere, and so when you're in that territory, what could be is still out there, right? It's just where we are now. And in most hunters' opinion, I think is better than it was, unless you're the guy who just wants to shoot a buck to say he shot a buck.
Yeah. And our buddy shot a buck that was about that size. Mm-hmm. And they were making a big deal about it. And I was like, hey man, it was his first buck. I'm like, it's awesome. Like, take the photo. I'm like, good job. But, we're looking at it, like, just compared to like some of the other deer, and it's just, but when you look at the habitat, it's like that everywhere. So for me, I'm just always curious. I mean, you look at, cause I know enough, talking to enough of people from PA about the history, like you said, the 2-year-old, like, oh my God, type of thing.
Giant.
to where it is today. And again, I see that, and it's always an interesting thing for me, because I think you look at states like PA, like you said, it's number one archery. Like, obviously
331,000 archery
obviously
hunters.
People are hunting and people are not fed up with hunting, by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
So for me, on one side, you see all these positives, like they're the number one archery hunting in the country. But then, it seems like a lot of people, local guys, like when I was out there at the deer camp, like the locals in the community, like, just, you hear bitching all the time. And I'm like, I don't get it,
man.
I'm like, I'm just an Ohio guy coming over here for the first time. I'm like, I had fun.
Most of us go over to your area.
Yeah. I saw, I went, our buddy's got a cabin up there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, we spend all day hunting. I'm like, I didn't have an antlerless tag, or I'd have been done in 20 minutes,
Yeah.
I was just like, holy shit. I'm like, they're just doe
everywhere. And so that is the factor of, over the last 20 years, we went from right around 1 million to, I think we're sitting around 750,000. So we've dropped 250,000 hunters, and the majority of the hunters also have peeled away from those bigger wood areas. So now the density of hunters in those areas is so low that they can continue to issue more doe tags. There's just nobody there to fill them, right? And so that's why you've got these higher populations of antlerless deer. You also have guys like Steve Shirk, seeing giant bucks up in these big wood mountains that historically didn't exist up there. Like, if you found a forkhorn, that's what you were killing. And so now you've got all these guys who are kind of piled around the suburban areas. They've got better deer hunting at home than to drive 3 hours up to the mountains. It's this weird imbalance, because from what I understand, a lot of it is habitat based, right? It's kind of the old, let me throw the hula hoop out there, see what it lands in, and then I need to know if I need to shoot more deer or not, and so there's a lot of that happening, especially on the state-owned property. And then the doe allocation side, listen, there's no more area, there's no more access, right? And so they keep increasing. I think this year they just said they're going to do a 15% increase in doe allocation tags, which is substantial.
Yeah, that sounds big.
They won't get used, right? There's no, people may get them, right? But there's nowhere to go and use them anymore. That's the issue.
Yeah, and I think it's the issue a lot across a lot of the whitetails range. I mean, even here in Ohio, like, I mean, access is an issue because, private lands, you got so many people hunting it. You find a good piece in Ohio, like, I mean, especially up here where I am in Northeast Ohio, I find a tract of land that I might get a hold of the landowner, like, I already got so-and-so, already out here. And it's like, okay, I get it, but at the same
And your
time,
alternative is what? Public? And I mean,
yeah,
listen,
I refuse. I won't
I'm
do it.
notorious for knocking on public, and I grew up hunting public. I mean, I didn't have private land. I didn't own any land. I didn't have private land. I hunted public. The problem is I don't mind hunting my balls off to have a good experience and enjoy it. But I look at a lot of these novice hunters and newer hunters coming into it, especially post COVID, and think about their experience on a piece of public land deer hunting during gun season right
Oh
now.
my God.
It is miserable for them.
Yeah.
Why would they want to ever stick with this and continue to do it? Right? Their
Yeah.
experience out of the gate is just plain misery. At least back in the day, we saw guys, but man, we had mutual respect for people, and you could just go and you could hunt and people would move deer. Now it's like, I mean, if I walk by a guy an hour before dark, he's sitting there hitting his flashlight at me, and it's like, yeah, dude, I'm going a mile past you. He'll cuss me up and down until I get past him. Just because he thinks he's there, he's blocking the rest of the land.
Yeah.
Like, no, dude, it's public.
I'm not old by any stretch of imagination, but I can't tolerate people anymore. Like I just don't. I've hunted public land once. Now I've been pretty fortunate. I've got family and friends that have property, so it's I'd never really had to, but I just to see what it was like, and I was like, I'll never do this again. Like I was the guy that was up in the stand and just having people walk all through, not giving a shit about everything, and I'm like, I don't even know why I'm hunting right now.
That's it, man. It's miserable. Why would you do it? I mean, that's where I've worked really hard so that I could acquire some of my own farms because I never had them, and to enjoy those with my kids. But I still hunt a lot of different states across the Midwest public. And, some of the places I've killed multiple mature bucks in Kansas on public land, in the last 9 years. The last 3, I've never seen so many people out on public land. I mean, I'm talking like every nook and cranny spot that I've scouted for 9 years. I mean, there were 3 cars parked on it. And then the fact is, I'm the kind of guy, if there's 3 cars parked there, I'm not going to walk in on you. I'm not going to do it. Like, it's already, I don't know where you're at. I'm just not going to do it. If there's 1 car, I'll probably take my chances. Yeah. But I mean, it's just, they're loaded. We went into Southern Illinois, and I mean, we couldn't find a parking spot at some of these public places. And it's like, none of these guys are killing deer because it's just a wave of people walking through and just pressuring everything, right? There's no strategy to access or anything.
Yeah, it's the same thing here. I mean, if I have a season, man, where I haven't really gotten anything by gun season, I get real discouraged because after gun season, especially like on my properties, like I'm the only one that really hunts it, but surrounding, that's not the case. And I'm up there and just hear boom, boom, boom. I'm just like, God. I'm still out there with my bow, and I'm just like, well, maybe someone will push something my way, or whatever.
I mean, that's what you have to think. Yeah. It's crazy, man.
Yeah. The travel patterns, just they're for understandably why. I mean, they're just so. That's why my wife, she gets mad at me because I hunt so hard in the early season. I'm like, I want to be done. I want to go out during the rut, enjoy the rut, that second week of November, and just hit it hard. And then, and then I'm just like, I'm out. Then I'm duck hunting, duck and goose hunting the rest of the time, type
Yeah.
Thing. Yeah. But all right, Jamie, we've been on for a while, man. I appreciate everything. I think it was a good conversation. We talked about some things I didn't anticipate talking about.
But that's why I roll.
Exactly. That's how I do too. People always ask me like, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, here's an idea. I'm like, honestly,
just wing it.
It's conversation. You're just going to wing it. So I will go ahead and plug where people can find you, how people can get a hold of you, what you have going on.
Yeah. So right now, the biggest place you can find us is Jared and I on the HUNTR Podcast. It's HUNTR. We're in the same kind of places you are: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. Drop one every week on that side, and that's kind of our big thing right now. And if people are in the Southwest Pennsylvania area, Jared and I are selling land down here, so it's kind of our gigs right now. And like this podcast, I mean, we just do it for fun, man. It's a great atmosphere to continue to just have good discussions about topics that I think people need to have discussions around, and maybe they're not getting it in some other places, and that's what makes it different.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm not beholden to anybody, so I have no problem saying.
Me either, man.
I'm like, listen, you're being a dumb shit right now.
You get what you get, and at the end
I'm
of
not
the day
losing sponsors. It's like,
no.
who's gonna cancel me? Like, it's like whatever. Yeah. But anyway, so I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, man.
Big fan of your guys' podcast as well. So like I said, thank you for coming on, and I hope everybody enjoyed this. And I thank everybody for joining us till the very end. That's always a plus. And we'll see everybody next time. Thanks, everybody. And that's a wrap on another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. I want to thoroughly take this time to thank everybody who has listened or even watched till the end of this episode and had the opportunity to hopefully enjoy the show that we put out for you. It's something that we're really trying to do and take notes and put good quality content for everybody to enjoy. We want to take this moment also to, if you enjoyed the show, check us out over on our social media platforms. Give us a like, give us a follow, check that bell notification, look for the content that we're putting out. Of course, reach out to us, leave comments. Did you like the show? We would love to hear your reviews of the show and any concerns that you have, any updates or any type of feedback to make our content better. We're always open ears for the people that are consuming our show and our content. We want to hear from you. What is it that you want to see and what is it that you would like us to do? If you want to check us out on any of our social media, first off, you can head over to our website, go to www.huntsciencepodcast.com. You can check us out on Instagram at huntscience_podcast, or you can check us out over at our Facebook page at The Hunt Science Podcast. Any of those is open. You can, like I said, feel free to comment and all of the above that you do with social media. I just want to take this time again to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for everybody for watching and listening to the content that we're putting out. It means the world to me, and I can't wait for you guys to join us on another episode. Until then, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.